Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with another week of World War II on to week 10, the 3rd of November, 1939. Molotov's heel on Finland and the phony war. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love you to join the Discord, follow me over at Twitch, and please do go check out the two gaming channels here on YouTube. One is for the stream VODs, and one is for edited content. Yada, yada, yada. So with all that said, don't really actually have anything to stake here. Um, I don't know what the phony war is actually. Oh wait, no, I think I do. Are they referring to that 6-month period here following the end of Poland's defeat and before Germany invades the Netherlands and Belgium and into France? Is that what we call the phony? I think that's what we call the phony war. Let's see if I'm correct. Let's dive right in. Also, slightly new setting.
November 3rd, 1939. You've been at war for 2 months, but you haven't fought. Sure, the odd skirmish, naval encounter, or aerial dogfight, but no big battles, either offensive or defensive. For many of the British and French, this was no longer a real war. It was a phony war.
I was right.
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, decrees went out in German-controlled Poland, not only for conscripted labor, but guidelines for general behavior. Hitler aired his future plans for fighting Russia, and the first discussions for an ultimate weapon, an atomic bomb, were held in Washington. But this week, there were a lot more discussions going on back in Europe.
Holy mustache. Damn, that goes from here to, like, out of here.
In fact, negotiations between the Finns and the Soviets had been by now in progress for weeks, but the Finns still refused to agree to Soviet territorial demands. The Soviets have been pretty cordial so far, but on November 3rd, Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov drops his mask. Since we civilians don't seem to be making any progress, perhaps it's the soldiers' turn to speak. Well, he had already sort of dropped it just as he was heading for this week's round of negotiations in a speech that went out to the whole world. From who does Finland hope to get help? Poland, too, had a guarantee.
Damn, he's throwing shade. Oh, you know, you can't help but respect that. Because he's right. He's right. Like, damn.
The meeting on the 3rd was again a stalemate. The Finns were not going to give up Hanko on the Finnish mainland and at the mouth of the Gulf of Finland under any circumstances. And if you're wondering what the overall territorial claims I mentioned a few weeks ago would look like if they were the same for maybe a country you're more familiar with, I read this in the Winter War. It came from the Foreign Ministry's White Book. If it were Britain to whom the demands were being made, it would mean giving up the Isle of Wight and the Channel Islands. In the north, the enemy would get to fortify the Orkney and Shetland Islands, and the British border would have to move inland from Norfolk about 80 kilometers, ruining British defenses. The Finns were worried about becoming a subject people and all that might entail. The Poles are by now a subject people, but that wasn't really good enough in general for Nazi ideology. If you're going to have a subject people, you really had to create a master race. This week, on October 28th, Heinrich Himmler issued a procreation order to the SS. It would be the task of German women and girls of good blood to become mothers of children to soldiers setting off for battle. But this was going to become organized in a system. Lebensborn were essentially human stud farms where young girls, carefully selected, could procreate with the SS men. Maternity homes would be set up for the children, who would, of course, be specially treated. As for those on the other end of the treatment spectrum, on November 1st, German propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels visits Łódź, and he wrote his thoughts concerning the city's Jews, some 200,000 of them. It is indescribable. They are no longer people, but beasts. There is therefore not a humanitarian, but a surgical task. Here, one must make a radical incision. Otherwise, Europe will be ruined by the Jewish sickness. That same day, a magazine in Berlin wrote, "Behind all the enemies of Germany's ascendancy stand those who demand our encirclement. The oldest enemies of the German people and of all healthy rising nations, the Jews. Yep, behind all their enemies. But it wasn't just Jews,
I'm just got nothing to say.
as we've seen, that are subject to terror in Poland. On the last day of the week, 96 Polish schoolteachers from Ripon are summoned by the Gestapo, arrested, and then shot dead. As you may imagine, the main job of the Polish government in exile was to perform the reorganization of the Polish armed forces. The Navy was fairly easy to do, partly because there weren't that many ships, but since they were only going to work with the British, negotiations were relatively simple. The ships would be operationally under command of the British Admiralty, but internally they would remain Polish with Polish crews. Things like supplies and repairs and even salaries were paid by the British as a loan to the Polish government for...
I was literally wondering in my head, how did pay work? How does pay work for these soldiers in fighting for, like, their government and exile, like in this situation? And that just kind of got answered. Obviously, does that apply to the whole? Probably not, but in this case, for the Polish Navy, it does.
However long the war lasted. At first, this was all just for the Polish destroyer division, but in November, the Poles placed all ships, including merchant ones, and all personnel at British disposal. And since Britain could really use some extra ships, the Poles had work to do right away. Already in October, the destroyers were sent to patrol the western coast of Ireland. The British government is worried that the IRA might allow German subs to resupply there, but going there themselves would violate Irish neutrality, which might have big repercussions with the Americans and their large Irish community. So they send the Poles to do it. Rebuilding the army and the air force will take much more time. But Poland's allies have armies and air forces, and they aren't doing much at all. The phony war, or the Boer War, is really a thing by now. This was war without war. Britain and France were at war with Germany, but other than a few skirmishes the French had had in early September, there was no fighting. Poland had fallen, so the fight their governments had committed them to left many French and British feeling that this was futile. What was now the point in being at war? The French army was deployed, with the British on the left, but they had no offensive plans, absolutely not until they were better armed anyhow. Heck, even that deployment had hitches because of Belgian neutrality. Everyone assumes that if Germany attacks in the West, it will be through Belgium like in 1914, but Belgium's King Leopold is damn sure not going to give the Germans a pretext for doing so by admitting Allied troops to neutral Belgian land. So by...
My man, it didn't help your people in the first war. It's not gonna help you here.
now, the Allies are building defenses on the French border that they plan to abandon if and when Germany does attack. The British do not have a large reserve of trained men anyhow. Plans for limited conscription had only been approved in May, and full conscription didn't begin until Britain had already joined the war. That was just 2 months ago. So they could really only provide fairly limited ground and air forces to aid the French. France had begun to prepare for war before the British, but they were still awaiting delivery of loads of tanks and aircraft. So at this point, even had they had the will to do so, the two couldn't really have taken on the Wehrmacht or run a big aerial campaign against Germany. And that's if they had wanted to. Thing is, a lot of their leaders are convinced that they have time on their side. The British want to blockade Germany by sea as they had in the First World War. But you know, that took several years to be effected. Maurice Gamelin, the commander-in-chief of the French armed forces, talks about having a big offensive in 1941 or even 1942. Some people...
Damn, they're taking the lessons learned from World War I a bit too far, I think.
and government think that Hitler and the Nazis will be overthrown by more sensible Germans. And they have other worries at home besides just the Germans. The French have a paranoia about the communists who could be Stalinist tools. Last month, 35 communist members of parliament were actually detained, members of parliament detained in the interest of French national security. But
Damn.
France wasn't even at war with the Soviet Union. Still, now in November and over the coming winter months, thousands of communist activists will also be interned. But it is the inactivity that really preys on public sentiment. In the minds of many French and British people, the war effort seemed purposeless. Their nations were committed to fight, yet were not fighting. But where would that fight be? If you think the French are itching for a rematch of 1914 on their own territory, you can think again.
Yeah.
Yet,
Which also then goes into the problem of like, then why the fuck are you standing around and not pushing in? Like, the Germans are going to come to you eventually if you just continue to stand there. Like this is,
the economic strain of keeping 2.7 million men under arms, equipped and fed, they kind of feel they have to do something. They propose things like a Balkan front to preempt any German activity there. But the British nixed that because that might make the Italians join the Germans. And being so passive is just wearing on the men's morale. I found a quote from British Corps Commander Alan Brooke when watching a French army parade in November 1939 when Max Hastings' all hell let loose. Seldom have I seen anything more slovenly. Men unshaven, horses ungroomed, complete lack of pride in themselves or their units. What shook me most, however, was the look in the men's faces. Disgruntled and insubordinate looks. I could not help wondering whether the French are still a firm enough nation to again take their part in seeing this war through. And with that, I will end this week of the war. Perhaps a phony war. The Finns still refusing the Soviets, but the Soviets losing patience. The Germans actively beginning a procreation program. A dehumanizing one, but one that ideally produces a desired type of human. The British and the French bored because they were at war, but there was no war. Now I can imagine sitting around your defenses week after week as autumn rains grow colder and colder, and you miss your homes, your families, you miss your friends. I can imagine that you may long for some action to break the monotony. But be careful what you wish for. You may get it.
in a few months.
If you want to understand more about how the Nazi thinking about race and procreation was influenced by pseudoscience from the 19th century, have a look at our dictionary episode about Ottmar von Verschuer, a Nazi doctor and scientist. It is right here. And please support our war effort by joining the Time Ghost Army on Patreon. See you next time.
And that was week 10 of World War II. Molotov's heel on Finland in the phony war. November 3rd, 1939. I've got nothing really to add here at the end of this video. There really wasn't anything happening this week. I mean, just frustrations with the people. Nothing really new for this week. I feel like the next couple months or so might be like that. I'm not quite sure. I don't know World War. I know a decent amount of World War II, just because like you spend time on the internet as a historian, you kind of end up forced into learning about World War II. So yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I forgot I was gonna say, but I don't really know like the nitty gritty of World War II really, despite all the World War II videos we watched. Anyways, that was that earlier thought finished. Hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.